Soon after Oliver Cromwell relaxed the medieval ban on Jews living in England in 1656, the Portuguese Mendes da Costa family moved to London and bought this substantial property. No, not that one. This one. They may in fact have been the first Jews to own freehold land in the UK since the expulsion in 1290. Cromwell House is now the Ghanaian embassy. When the da Costas lived here, it was thought to have its own mikveh and private synagogue. Further up Highgate Hill, in South Grove, in the heart of the village, is Church House. Now this elegant Georgian townhouse certainly does have a mikveh. It's currently used as a wine cellar. 200 years ago, the property was owned by Hyman Hurwitz, a friend of the opium-eating poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who lived nearby. Hurwitz, a noted scholar, ran a Jewish school for boys here. Later he opened a similar school for girls next door. Unlike nearby Golders Green, Hendon and Finchley, Highgate has never had too visible a Jewish presence. However, by the late 1920s, a sufficient number of Jewish families had moved into the area to establish a small synagogue at 88 Archway Road. Nothing remains of that building now. It was part of a parade of shops and residential upper parts, bulldozed 40 years ago for road widening. It stood about here, near some 200-year-old almshouses that were also demolished. The good news is that number 88 was too small, and soon after the war ended, the local community acquired what was then a disused Baptist chapel 400 metres away at 200A Archway Road, just the other side of the Hornsey Lane Bridge, Suicide Bridge, which used to divide London from Middlesex and now separates inner 0207 London from outer 0208 London, or Islington from Haringey. At its peak, in the 1950s and 60s, over 400 members attended. But in late October 1975, disaster struck. An electrical fire destroyed the interior of the building. It lay derelict for years until it was sold in the 1980s and became a Sri Lankan temple. Meanwhile, the shocked community was offered refuge in several nearby churches. They first held weekly services here. After a year or so, they moved to this church and stayed for some years. Now this building is itself a converted block of 16 luxury flats. By the end of the 1970s, the dwindling community was onto its third local church, each time using small rooms where iconography was taken off the walls out of sensitivity to the Jewish non-believers. Generous as these churches were, they could not provide accommodation for the high holidays. So for 6 years the community found temporary spiritual shelter in various Whittington Hospital nurses' quarters, including this one. The current synagogue building was acquired by the United Synagogue 30 years ago, just before being bought at auction by property developers. Highgate Shul has now been in this building longer than any other in its 85-year history. And its plans for development include an extensive 1.7 million rebuild starting in 2012, just after the High Holy Days, and completing in August 2013. This model illustrates the dramatic new building needed to accommodate the growing community, and in particular the children's classes. On the 13th of February 1944, a young mother gave birth here in Highgate Tube Station. It was being used as a bomb shelter at the time. The baby grew up to be a journalist, television presenter, musician, and briefly a politician. He was even the 56th mayor of Cincinnati. We know him best as Jerry Springer. Highgate is today honouring its own Gerry, Gerry Bloom, a Shul member since he moved to the area in 1947, and a board member for a record 36 consecutive years. Today, on his 95th birthday, on Remembrance Sunday, he sings Anim Zemirot, the Hymn of Glory, in front of members of the community, family and friends.
Gerry, Gerry, Gerry. Anim Zemirot v'Shirmerod, ki elecha nafshi savod. Nafshi chemdo b'seyodecha l'das kol rosoydecha. Midei dabri b'chvodecha, chomer libi el doldecha. Asapa kavodecha below risicha, Adamcha achancha below yadaiticha. Good los chag v'rasecha, kinu l'sokef be'lasecha. Him shilucha b'rov chejonos, hincha echad b'chol devyanos. Zikna b'yom dinu v'chavus b'yom korav, k'yishmel chomos yadav lovav. Talalay rosh rosh nimla, kavutso sov v'sis aloyla. Keset ha'paz dimus rosho, v'chakal metach kavot shem kodsho. Machlafos rosho v'himei v'chavus, kavutso sov tal talim shaharos. Segula so tehi b'yodo at-teres, u'tenif melucha t'vis t'feres. Pere alai uferi olov, v'koro v'elai v'kori elov. Kesha tifilin herolionov, Temunas adono el negedeinov. Rosh valcha emes, kareim rosh, davadavim deveshcha devosh. Tehilasi, tehilavashcha ateres, utefilasi, kiton ketores. Bimchasi salelavash mashbir, macholel molid, tzadikaper. Yerev nasichi yolecha, ki nafshi savogelecha. Mi malay gevurus Adonai, yashmea kol helaso.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute delight and pleasure to welcome you to this most wonderful of occasions. I just wanted to point out two remarkable coincidences that take place this weekend, or in connection with Gerry's momentous occasion. First, as everyone knows, today is Gerry's 95th English birthday. What you might be unaware of is that tonight is the 17th of Cheshvan, and that is Gerry's Hebrew birthday. And having looked through the annals of Jewish history, not only is it Gerry's birthday, but the 17th of Cheshvan was also the day that the flood, the famous Bible story of the flood with Noah, the Torah tells us that that was the day the flood began, the 17th of Cheshvan. The other time that the 17th of Cheshvan is mentioned is in the prophets, where it's spoken about King Solomon, who completed the building of the first temple in Jerusalem on the 17th of Cheshvan. And having spoken to Gerry before, he assures me that although he remembers the second event, he barely remembers the first. But the other coincidence is that in the weekly Sedra sheet that the United Synagogue publishes, the feature article this week is about Anim Zemirot, or should I say Anim Zemirot. And it is known as the Shir HaKavod, the Song of Glory. And it was written in the early 13th century by a young friend of Gerry Bloom, Rabbi Yehuda, the Chassid of Rennigsburg. And originally the custom was to recite it, to sing it every day. But then there was a dispute between famous Ashkenazi scholars, the Ramah of Moshe Isserlis, whose grave we visited in Krakow 2 years ago. He said that this song is so holy that it should only be recited on the Sabbath. The Vilna Gaon came along a couple of hundred years later and said it's even more holy than that. So therefore it should only be recited on Yom Tov. So for those who follow the tradition of the Vilna Gaon, you will only hear Anim Zemirot sung on Yom Tov. For those who follow Ashkenazi tradition, as we do, we sing it only on the Sabbath. But when Ian suggested this idea of singing it on a Sunday, I looked at the reason that we don't sing it every day. And the Ramah writes that it's too special, especially in light of the Talmudic dictum not to praise God too excessively. However, I felt that today is a day when we can praise God excessively, a day where we're very grateful that He's kept Gerry in good health, and it's a delight that, having been reciting Anim Zemirot probably for 85 years or so, 87 years or so, it's a delight to have him in good health here in the synagogue and being able to sing it. So we made a special dispensation for it to be sung this morning. And I'd just like to finish off with a blessing on behalf of the community, that Gerry, you should continue to go from strength to strength, continue to be the father of the synagogue, and continue to sing Anim Zemirot in good health with lots of nachas from your family, from your children, from your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, for many, many years. Amen. Amen.
Tehilasi, tehilavarscha ateres, utefilasi, kitaun ketares. Bimchasi shalelavarsh mashbir, macholel molid, tzadikaper. Yered nasichi yolecha, ki nafshi savogelecha. Mi malay v'rose Adonai, Yashmea, all the hell